Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. Today we are here to consider the PROSPER Act, a bill that will make necessary changes and updates to higher education to keep it on a more sustainable path into the future. I'm also pleased that two important pieces of legislation that I previously introduced have been included in the text of the PROSPER Act. The first is a resolution supporting free speech on college campuses, which has been eroded over the past few years through free speech zones and so-called safe spaces. College is a place where your thoughts and beliefs are supposed to be challenged by your peers. We have unfortunately moved away from that toward nothing more than a homogeneous student bodies that would rather shout down a speaker with whom they disagree than engage in a thoughtful exchange of differing opinions. The First Amendment in our nation's Constitution guarantees all of us the right of free speech. And for years, college campuses have strongly supported these ideals. As a Vietnam-era veteran, and during the time of the Civil Rights Movement, I was in college then. I saw the disagreements taking place daily on college campuses and all throughout society about the war itself, about the Civil Rights Movement, and the treatment of our service members returning from active duty. While I did not agree with much of what was said, people had a right to speak their mind and exchange their disagreements openly and without worrying about college administrators stepping in to say they would not only do so in a small space on campus during restrictive hours. According to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, 1 in 10 of America's top colleges and universities quarantine students' expression to so-called free speech zones. There needs to be a greater recognition that this is a problem, and students should be made aware of potential limits to free speech during joining college campus communities. And this is why I introduced a bipartisan resolution to serve as a first step to protect Americans' First Amendment rights on college campuses. And I'm glad to see the language being included in this bill. This is a strong step in the right direction. It's my hope that passing this legislation will send a message to colleges and college campus leaders across the country. If our colleges and universities protect and foster the free and open exchange of ideas, our society will be better off as a result. I'm also proud that the inclusion of the Accessible Instructional Materials of Higher Education, or AIM Act for short, into the text of the PROSPER Act. This bill establishes an independent commission that will develop voluntary guidelines for accessible post-secondary electronic instructional materials and related technologies. Such guidelines will be used to ensure students with disabilities are afforded the same educational benefits as non-disabled students, to better inform the selection and use of such materials at institutions of higher education, and to encourage entities that produce such materials and technologies to make accessible versions more readily available. Additionally, the Commission will develop an annotated list of existing national and international IT standards as an information resource for institutions of higher education and companies that service the higher education market. The Commission will be comprised of 19 key stakeholders appointed by the House, Senate Majority and Minority Leaders, the Speaker of the House, President Pro Tem of the Senate, and the Secretary of Education. Members of the Commission will include representatives from the disability community, institutions of higher education, and developers and manufacturers of post-secondary electronic educational materials and related technologies. Issuance of voluntary guidelines and an annotated list of information technology standards will require approval of 75% or 15 of the 19 members of the Commission. Upon passage of the PROSPER Act, the Commission will have up to 2 years to issue updated voluntary guidelines and annotated lists of IT standards, after which the Secretary of Education will request public comment on whether the updates are needed within the first 5 years. No student pursuing an education can be put at a disadvantage because he or she has a disability. And this provision in the PROSPER Act simply encourages higher education institutions to provide equal access to all instructional materials. With an increasing amount of coursework requiring digital resources, it makes sense to encourage colleges and universities to make accessible material available to support all their students, including those with a disability. I've partnered with Representative Courtney on this important issue, and I thank all the stakeholders who have worked to help develop a solution that can be supported on a bipartisan basis. I would like to ask unanimous consent that letters of support be received and put in the record.
Without objection.
Finally, I want to say that higher education in America is one of our nation's hallmarks, and helping students gain access to higher education is one of the most important jobs we have in this Congress. I look forward to considering the PROSPER Act today, and I encourage all my colleagues to support this. With that, I yield back.